The black SUV stopped outside Lar Rowe Estate restaurant, and Claire Dawson felt her stomach get tight for reasons she couldn't understand. She had been a waitress for 6 years, moving from city to city, always watching, always careful. Something about tonight felt wrong. The air inside the restaurant was too still, too quiet, like the moment before a storm starts. She smoothed down her apron and told herself she was being too worried. But Claire had learned a long time ago that being worried kept you alive. Luca Morelli stepped out of the car first, his fancy suit looking perfect and sharp. Claire had heard the whispers about him from the other workers. The name alone made people nervous. Mafia Boss, criminal empire, a man who controlled half the city's secret operations with nothing more than a phone call. But as he walked through the entrance, holding the door open for the fancy woman behind him, Claire saw something different. The way he touched his mother's elbow, gentle and protective. The way Helen Morelli smiled at her son, pride mixing with something that looked like sadness. This was a dangerous man who loved his mother. Claire didn't know what to think about that. She was assigned to their table. Her hands shook slightly as she walked over, menu tucked under her arm. Helen Morelli was everything. The news said she was calm, powerful, the state's moral compass, the woman who'd built her political career on family values and justice. Standing next to her son, the opposite should have been impossible. But Claire watched the way Helen squeezed Luca's hand across the table and she understood. Love didn't follow the rules people thought it did. Luca ordered for both of them without looking at the menu, his voice low and controlled. Claire wrote everything down, knowing his eyes were following her movements. She'd gotten good at being invisible, just another waitress in a sea of service workers. But something about the way he watched her made her think he saw more than most people did. She went back to the kitchen, her gut telling her to pay attention. Something was coming. She just didn't know what. The first sign came 20 minutes later. 2 men in dark suits came in through the kitchen entrance instead of the front door. Claire stopped near the prep station, watching them move with purpose toward the dining room. They weren't security. Luca's actual security team stood outside, visible through the windows. These men were something else. The head chef didn't question them. The manager looked away. Claire felt ice slide down her back. Then she noticed the waiter. He'd appeared out of nowhere, staying close to Luca's table, refilling water glasses that weren't empty, adjusting silverware that didn't need adjusting. Claire had worked at Lar Rowe for 3 weeks and she'd never seen him before. His movements were too practiced, too careful. He was getting into position. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. She forced herself to keep moving, to act normal, but her eyes never stopped watching details. The manager was whispering into his phone near the wine cellar, his face pale and sweating despite the cool air conditioning. Claire passed close enough to hear pieces. Something about timing. Something about being ready. The delivery driver who'd brought in supplies earlier hadn't signed the logbook. That never happened. Every delivery was written down. Every box counted except tonight. Claire's chest tightened. This wasn't just worry. This was preparation. She glanced back at Luca's table. Helen wasn't eating. The fancy meal sat untouched in front of her, getting cold. Her phone kept lighting up on the white tablecloth and each time it did she jumped. Luca was talking, relaxed, unaware, but his mother's hands were shaking. Claire watched Helen lift her wine glass 3 times without drinking, watched her avoid her son's eyes, watched her check the time over and over. This was a woman waiting for something terrible. Claire's own past had taught her to recognize victims and dangerous people. She'd grown up in foster care, moving between homes where survival meant reading body language better than words. She'd learned which adults were safe and which ones weren't, which situations to avoid and which ones to endure. That education had never left her, even after she'd aged out of the system and built a quiet life serving food to people who never really saw her. Tonight, every lesson was screaming the same message. Danger coming soon, unavoidable. Claire needed proof. She needed to be sure before she did something that could get her killed. She took a tray of empty glasses toward the back hallway, moving past the restrooms. That's when she heard the voices. 2 men speaking low and urgent inside the manager's office. The door was cracked open just enough. She agreed. The sun dies tonight. Clean hit. Career saved if it's done. Claire's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing. She knew exactly who they were talking about. She knew who the son was and she knew who she was. Helen Morelli had set up her own son to be killed. The woman who'd been squeezing his hand across the table. The woman who couldn't look him in the eyes. Claire's mind spun. What kind of pressure could make a mother do something like this? She had maybe minutes, maybe less. Claire moved back toward the dining room on shaking legs, her mind racing through options. Call the police. They'd never arrive in time, and half of them were probably on someone's payroll anyway. Warn Luca's security outside. The hit team would see her and move up their plan. She had one chance, one moment. And if she was wrong, if she'd misunderstood, Luca Morelli would probably have her killed for insulting his mother. But if she was right and did nothing, she'd watch a man die in front of her. Claire grabbed a blank receipt from her apron and a pen. Her hand shook so badly the first 3 words were barely readable. She forced herself to breathe, to think clearly. She rewrote it neat and small. Your mother sold you out. You're not leaving alive. Go now. She folded the paper twice, put it in a napkin and walked to the table. Luca was mid-sentence, telling his mother a story about a business deal. Helen was nodding, tears gathering in her eyes that she kept blinking away. Claire set down fresh water glasses, her movements automatic from years of practice. As she collected Luca's empty bread plate, she placed the folded note directly on top of his main course. He glanced up at her. For just a second their eyes met. Claire let him see her fear. Let him see that this wasn't a joke or a trick. Then she turned and walked away, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone in the restaurant could hear it. She made it 3 steps before she heard the paper unfold. Silence. Claire didn't turn around. She couldn't. She kept walking toward the kitchen, counting seconds, waiting for shouting or laughter or security to grab her arms. Instead she heard Luca's voice, softer than before. Mom. The single word carried so much weight that Claire almost stopped walking. She forced herself through the kitchen door, pressing her back against the wall inside, trying to hear what happened next. The clatter of the kitchen covered most sounds from the dining room, but she caught pieces. Helen's voice breaking. Luca's controlled but strained. Then movement, chairs scraping, footsteps. Claire looked through the small window in the kitchen door. Luca was standing, adjusting his jacket with careful, deliberate movements. His security team outside straightened, suddenly alert. They recognized something in his posture. Helen sat frozen at the table, mascara running down her face, one hand pressed against her mouth. That's when everything exploded into motion. The fake waiter reached under his apron. The 2 men from the kitchen entrance burst through the dining room door, hands inside their coats. A red laser dot appeared on the chair where Luca had been sitting just seconds before. Claire didn't think. She shoved through the kitchen door and grabbed Luca's sleeve. Kitchen hallway now. Luca's reflexes were faster than she expected. He moved the moment she pulled, taking her with him. They hit the narrow servant hallway just as gunfire tore through the dining room. The sound was deafening, nothing like the movies. Glass shattered. People screamed. The beautiful table where a mother and son had been sharing dinner was destroyed in seconds, bullets ripping through wood and fabric and china. Luca's hand was iron around Claire's wrist, pulling her through the maze of back hallways. He knew the layout somehow, knew exactly which door led to the loading dock. His security team appeared from nowhere, returning fire, creating cover. An armored SUV screeched to a stop outside the service entrance, door already open. Luca threw Claire inside first, then followed, his body shielding hers as bullets sparked off the vehicle's reinforced frame. The SUV took off before the door fully closed, tires screaming against pavement. Claire couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The adrenaline hit her system like poison, making her shake uncontrollably. Luca was on his phone, speaking rapid Italian, his voice deadly calm. Despite the chaos, he was giving orders, calling in favors, activating whatever network kept him alive in his world. Then he looked at Claire, and something in his expression made her realize the danger wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Claire's mind went blank. She was nobody, a waitress, a woman who'd learned to read people because not reading them had almost gotten her killed years ago. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Luca waited, patient, his dark eyes seeing everything. "Someone who notices things," she finally whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You saved my life." "Your mother set you up," Claire said, the words tumbling out. "I heard them talking. They said she agreed. They said her career would be saved if it was done clean." Luca's face went completely blank, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. He turned away, staring out the tinted window as the city blurred past. Claire watched his jaw clench, watched his hands curl into fists, watched him process a betrayal that would have broken most people. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Lucas said. "Somewhere even my organization doesn't know about." "Hey, if you're still watching, thank you. I promised my family I'd hit 1,000 subscribers before Christmas, and now I really need your help to keep that promise. Please subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments. It would mean the world to me." The safe house turned out to be a modest apartment in a neighborhood that didn't match Luca's reputation at all. Normal, quiet, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business. Inside, the space was simple but clean, with blackout curtains and reinforced doors, a place built for hiding, not living. Luca made 3 phone calls, each one shorter than the last. Claire sat on the edge of a worn couch, trying to process what had just happened. She'd walked into work expecting a normal shift. Instead, she'd watched a hit squad try to kill a mafia boss whose own mother had betrayed him. Nothing about this was normal. Nothing about this made sense. An hour later, a soft knock came at the door. Luca checked the security camera, then opened it. Helen Morelli stood in the hallway and she looked destroyed. Her perfect hair was messed up, her makeup smeared, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her purse. When she saw Luca alive, she made a sound that Claire would remember for the rest of her life. Relief and horror and grief all mixed together. "Luca," Helen whispered, reaching for him. He stepped back. The movement was small, but it might as well have been a canyon opening between them. Helen's face crumpled. She walked into the apartment like she was approaching her own execution. Claire started to leave to give them privacy, but Luca's voice stopped her. "Stay. You're part of this now." So Claire stayed, witnessing something she had no right to see. Helen collapsed into a chair and told them everything. The words poured out between sobs, a confession that explained the unexplainable. A powerful political group had discovered evidence of Helen's involvement in money laundering, years of careful corruption, of looking the other way while dirty money flowed through legitimate channels. They had documentation, proof enough to destroy her career and send her to prison. The group had offered one deal. Give them Luca's location. Help them arrange a clean hit and they'd bury the evidence forever. Let her continue her political career untouched. Helen swore she thought they only wanted to pressure Luca, to force him to sign off on some deal or territory agreement. She'd convinced herself it wasn't really danger, just leverage. "I didn't know they planned to kill you," Helen sobbed, looking at her son with devastated eyes. "I swear on everything. I thought it was just intimidation. When I realized what they actually intended, it was too late. I tried to stop it, tried to warn you, but they were watching me, monitoring everything. If I had called or texted, they'd have moved up the timeline." Helen explained how they'd approached her 3 weeks ago, presenting folders full of financial records, photographs, recorded conversations, evidence of bribes she'd accepted, of legislation she'd influenced for money, of connections to criminal organizations that would destroy her reputation forever. They'd given her 72 hours to decide. Help them or face complete destruction. "I thought I could outsmart them," Helen whispered. "I thought I could warn you somehow, find a way to protect both of us. But they were always watching. They had people everywhere. And when I finally understood they meant to actually take your life, I realized I'd already given them everything they needed." Luca stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. Claire watched him process this impossible situation. His mother hadn't chosen greed or power. She'd chosen fear. She'd been backed into a corner by people who understood exactly how to manipulate her. But the result was the same. She'd led her son to his own execution. "They'll want proof I'm gone," Luca said finally, his voice empty. "Photos, confirmation." Helen nodded miserably. "If they don't get it, they'll expose everything. Destroy me publicly, and then they'll come after you anyway, but without the element of surprise. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." The silence in the apartment was suffocating. Claire's mind was racing, processing information, seeing patterns. She'd spent years surviving by being smart, by thinking 3 steps ahead. An idea began forming. Risky and insane, but possible. "Give them what they want," Claire said quietly. Both Morellis turned to stare at her. "Let them believe he's gone," Claire continued, standing up, her voice growing stronger. "Create a convincing scene. Leak a false report. Make them think they won. And then, while they're celebrating and relaxed, you hit them from the shadows. Dismantle their entire operation. Destroy their leverage. Clear your name permanently. Luca's eyes narrowed, but she saw interest there. Calculation. Helen looked at Claire like she'd just offered salvation. They'd have to believe it completely, Luca said slowly. No room for doubt. So we make it perfect, Claire replied. I know how to pay attention to details. That's how I figured out the hit was happening in the first place. We stage everything exactly right. Burned vehicle, personal effects, leaked photos, a false coroner's report through underground channels. Your mother plays the grieving parent publicly. And you disappear. For how long? Helen whispered. However long it takes to destroy them, Luca said, and something dangerous entered his voice. If we're doing this, we do it completely. No half measures. Over the next 3 days they built a death that looked absolutely real. Luca's organization provided resources without knowing what they were actually for, believing it was preparation for retaliation. A car was stolen, burned in a remote wooded area with enough fire starter to ensure maximum damage. Luca's custom watch was placed near the wreckage, scratched and scorched but identifiable. A body from the morgue already scheduled for cremation was positioned inside with Luca's exact height and build. Claire handled the details with a precision that surprised even her. She thought through every angle, every question the group might ask. Photos were taken from specific distances that showed enough to convince but not enough to analyze. A friendly coroner who owed Luca's organization favors filed a rushed but official-looking report. And Helen delivered the performance of her lifetime, facing news cameras with devastated composure, releasing statements about private grief and family tragedy. The hardest part was Helen's public mourning. Claire watched her hold a press conference, her voice breaking at calculated moments, her composure cracking just enough to seem genuine. Helen talked about her son's troubled past, about hoping he'd find redemption, about the senseless violence that had stolen him. Every word was a carefully constructed lie, and Helen delivered it flawlessly. This was a woman who'd spent decades in politics. She knew how to perform. The group took the bait completely. Their celebration was monitored through wiretaps Luca's technical team had planted weeks earlier without knowing why. Champagne was poured. Congratulations exchanged. The threat of Luca Morelli was finally permanently eliminated. They'd won, which meant they stopped being careful. Luca emerged from hiding like a ghost, moving through the city with Claire at his side. She'd proven herself valuable, and Luca didn't waste valuable resources. Together they tracked the group's leadership, mapping connections, recording conversations, building an unbreakable case. During a raid on the restaurant after the hit, Claire had found a flash drive dropped by one of the attackers. It contained names, accounts, evidence of every dirty deal the group had arranged for the past decade. Helen used her political connections to feed information to federal authorities without revealing her source. Key group members started disappearing, arrested on charges that would keep them locked away forever. Their money laundering networks collapsed as accounts were frozen and seized. Every blackmail target they'd controlled was quietly freed, creating allies instead of victims. The investigation moved like a carefully choreographed dance. Each arrest led to another. Each seized document revealed new crimes. The group had thought themselves untouchable, protected by layers of influence and corruption. But Luca knew their world better than they did. He understood how power really worked, where the weak points were, which pressures would make people turn against each other. Claire watched him work with growing respect. This wasn't random violence or impulsive revenge. This was surgical precision. Each move calculated for maximum effect. Luca dismantled the group the way someone might dismantle a bomb, cutting the right wires in the right order until the whole thing fell apart. Took 4 months of patient, methodical work. 4 months of Luca staying dead to the world while systematically dismantling the organization that had tried to kill him. Claire spent those months learning his world, understanding how power really worked. The lines between right and wrong blurred until she stopped trying to find them. During those months something else happened. Something neither of them had planned for. Claire and Luca spent hours together in surveillance vans in safe houses, planning operations. They learned each other's habits, each other's tells. Claire discovered that Luca took his coffee black and couldn't sleep more than 4 hours at a time. Luca learned that Claire had a photographic memory and could recite conversations word for word days after hearing them. Trust built slowly between them, the kind that couldn't be rushed or faked. They'd both survived by being careful, by never letting anyone too close. But survival took different forms when you found someone who understood. The final group leader was taken down on a Tuesday morning, arrested in his office by federal agents while news cameras captured everything. Helen stood beside the police commissioner, her political career not just saved but strengthened by her apparent cooperation with law enforcement. That evening, Claire was closing Lar Rowe Estate restaurant. The place had reopened after being shut down for investigation, and she kept her job despite everything. Normal life, normal routine. She needed that stability after months of living in shadows. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Luca standing in the empty dining room. He looked different, somehow lighter. The weight he'd been carrying had finally lifted. "You saved my life," he said quietly, walking toward her. "You saved my mother's life. You saved everything." Claire smiled nervously, not sure what to say. She'd done what needed doing. That was all. Survival had always been her specialty. "I don't want you to be just the woman who saved me," Luca continued, stopping in front of her. "I want you beside me." Claire looked up at him, this man who controlled criminal empires and lived in constant danger, who'd been betrayed by his own mother and survived. And she saw someone who understood her completely. Someone who knew what it meant to always be watching, always calculating, always ready. She'd spent 6 years moving from city to city, running from connections, keeping herself isolated and safe. But maybe safety wasn't the same as living. Maybe trust, real trust, was worth the risk. "I'm not built for this world," Claire said softly. "I'm just someone who pays attention." "That's exactly what this world needs," Luca replied. "Someone who sees what others miss. Someone who acts when others freeze. You're not just someone who pays attention, Claire. You're someone who cares enough to risk everything for a stranger." Claire let herself lean into him, felt his arms wrap around her, solid and certain. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was quiet, human. The perfect ending for a story that had started with a note on a dinner plate and a mother's terrible choice. Outside Lar Rowe Estate restaurant, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside, two people who'd survived the impossible found something neither had been looking for, something that felt like home. And in a political office across town, Helen Morelli sat at her desk, looking at a photo of her son she could never display publicly. He was alive. She'd almost destroyed him, but he'd forgiven her. Not completely, maybe never completely, but enough to keep breathing. Enough to rebuild. She locked the photo away and returned to work, carrying a secret that would stay buried forever. Some sins couldn't be erased, only survived. And Helen Morelli had learned to live with hers. The note that changed everything sat in a safe deposit box, preserved like evidence of a miracle. 8 words scrawled on a restaurant receipt that had stopped a bullet and saved 3 lives. Claire never wanted to forget what those words represented. The moment she'd chosen to act instead of hide. The moment everything transformed. "Your mother sold you out. You're not leaving alive. Go now." Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it came from a waitress who paid attention. And sometimes, in a world built on betrayal and violence, the bravest thing you could do was slip someone a note and hope they believed you. Claire had spent her whole life being invisible, slipping through the cracks, surviving by never being seen. But Luca had seen her, really seen her, and instead of running from that exposure, she'd found something worth staying for. They left the restaurant together that night, walking into a future neither could have predicted. The danger wasn't gone completely. Never would be. But they'd face it together. Two people who'd learned that the strongest bonds were forged in fire. And somewhere in the darkness, the city kept its secrets, holding close the story of a mother's betrayal, a son's resurrection, and a waitress who'd changed everything.